Good morning. Welcome to Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion with me, Pastor Amanda. We are in chapter 3 of Genesis today, and we're getting into some of the good stuff now. This is where it really starts to kind of come alive what's going on here. So we find out that there is a very wily animal in the garden, and it is the serpent. We are informed that God has made this serpent. And the serpent does this really interesting conversation with the woman. And it's like this almost it's like he's almost gaslighting her right there. But he's trying to get her to kind of think, not just listen, but kind of do things. But he says, did God say? He asked her, did God say, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? And so there he's already kind of setting her up. Like, here we go. And then the woman says, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die. So he's getting her to think about clearly what's going on here. And then the serpent goes, oh, but you won't die. You won't die. God just knows that your eyes will be opened and you'll know good from evil. And so then this is the point where the woman has a choice to make. And it says that she saw that the food was good and it was a delight to the eyes. So there's a sense of desire and want for something that she's told she couldn't have. Sounds like any little 5-year-old being told that you're not allowed to have that candy. And then that's all that they can think about is that piece of candy. And so she took its fruit and she ate. Then we're told she also gave it to her husband. So without even letting him know what he was eating, she offers him this. And I find it interesting that it wasn't until they both ate that their eyes were both opened. It's kind of interesting that it really took the two of them disobeying together to have their eyes open to what was going on. And then it says they knew they were naked. And it's this moment in which they recognize their vulnerability. And there's a sense of shame that overcomes them because they recognize how vulnerable they are to the world and to the elements and what people might see or what God might think of them. They're all of a sudden concerned about these things. And when you think about it, like, how awesome would our lives be if we didn't have to worry about all that vulnerability? Like, we just trusted that God was going to take care of us, that we were all okay. But no, it's like this knowledge of everything else going on outside of us and inside of us all of a sudden makes us ashamed and vulnerable. And so we find that they hid themselves, and that's when they decided they needed clothing. And they heard, I love this, they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. And the man and his wife hid themselves. But the Lord called to the man and said, where are you? So there's a sense that God on a regular basis is having a close relationship with them. And so God's not absent from their lives. God didn't just leave them there on their own. And so there's really this broken trust that has happened on many, many levels here. And so, but the man does confess. except he blames the woman. And so there's this blame game that immediately, the man says the woman gave it to me, and then the woman says, well, the serpent tricked me. And so we can see what happens the moment we get a sense of knowledge. We immediately don't want to take responsibility for ourselves for some reason. And that's what we see happening here. The brokenness is really, this is where it really starts, when they're not willing to take responsibility for what's happening in their lives. And so we see then God, it's kind of like there's this little saying here that lasts several verses. And it's really what it is. It's a way for people, when they didn't understand science, when they didn't understand how things were happening, this story gives them a reason why things are the way they are. This is the reason why the snake doesn't have legs, because God has cursed it. This is the reason that women have birth pain, is because of this incident. This is the reason that men have to work the ground to be able to get their food, because of this. The story says that this curse was put upon them because of their brokenness. And so this is where we get this understanding. It gives meaning to why we experience the world the way we do. It is because of this brokenness. And it's a way for people to get meaning into their life through this. And then it also helps us to understand why we don't live forever. I mean, it's kind of like that's what we are always striving for, live forever. Because after we discover why the snake crawls on the ground, why the woman has pain when she gives birth, and why the man has to work the ground, we also discover that God is now aware that they might try to live forever by eating of another tree that was in the garden. And so then they're kicked out of the garden. And so that, that eternal search for living life forever, is there. And so, but it's interesting, that God had these trees right there within reach of them all the time. But then all of a sudden, when they disobey, it's now far away from them. And so we see this importance of obedience to be able to be in a happy place, almost is what you want to say. It is the most beautiful place in the world where everything's taken care of. But it was in disobedience that they don't have access to it anymore. But I also think it's interesting to note that even after God gets really mad at Adam and Eve, and it is like, curses them, so to speak, it still says that God made garments of skin for the man and for the wife and clothed them. So we see this parental care, this parental love of I'm going to take care of you ways I can, but you're still going to have to experience the consequences of your actions. And so, yes, there's this sense that brokenness has happened because we've had this free will to choose what we want. And then, but God will still care for us, but the consequences are still there. So it just kind of makes us think and reminds us God's love for us is one that asks for obedience. And yeah, it's hard. It's difficult. But that obedience puts us in a beautiful paradise. When we obey God, we're actually living in a paradise, so to speak. And at the same time, though, it's kind of nice to know, because we're all going to make stupid mistakes. We're all going to do things along the way that require consequences. And yet God still loves us in all of that. It's going to care for us. But God doesn't save us from our consequences. So it gives you something to think about in that. And so chapter 3 is one of those chapters that really sets us up for what's going to what's the rest of our history? Our history is of being told, here are the rules, or here are the things to obey. We break them. We have the consequences, and then God tries to come back in and help us and care for us, even though we've messed up. And so this is really, chapter 3 is the beginning of the Bible in the sense of this is the pattern we haven't gotten out of yet. But it tries to give us some understanding of why we experience some of the things the way we do when we don't have that information right out of our hand. And so that's chapter 3. And to all my wonderful viewers, I just want to let you know I'm taking a couple of days of vacation. So we're going to have a couple of days where we're not going to meet online, but we'll be back together next week. And we'll continue on in Genesis 4. So have a wonderful rest of your week. And I'll see you next week for Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion.